Okay, we are officially going to make this available later. Okay. All right. And then the last question we wanted to ask in this section was, what questions do you have that just pop right up to the top of your head when you're thinking about concurrent student enrollment and outcomes? So just, this is an open-ended question. You can type in a full question and submit it. This is essentially how we started. And another reason why we're asking this question is we imagine that you have similar questions to us. And that's kind of what got us started on this path. So hopefully we'll have a few pop up here.
This one takes a little bit longer to answer since you got to type it.
Right. That's a great question. Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good point. Sometimes, I mean, that's kind of it. You don't know what you don't know. You know, what can you even ask if you don't even have enough information to frame or phrase a question? Yeah. What barriers do students perceive to being successful in concurrent classes, or why do they shy away from enrolling? Excellent. What are the benchmarks for comprehension, workload, and engagement, such as words comprehended per minute, assignment complexity? Interesting. How do certain risk factors of poor academic performance are unique to concurrent students? Great questions. Give you another couple seconds here. Always a good one. What resources do our concurrent students need? They are a unique population that has separate needs from, say, online students or students with certain number of adult learner indicators, things like that. Yeah, that's great. Any more? And of course, as we go through the presentation, you are welcome to add to this, actually, or you can just put your messages into the chat. And if you have questions, we will be monitoring the chat and we can answer those again. Where there's going to be another section where another time where we specifically ask for your feedback and do some more engagement like this. But thank you for these responses. And then the next slide, I'll let Jeni take over on that one.
Yeah, let me switch my screen back real quick. Move you guys back over. Oh, goodness. And exit full screen. Too many screens. Okay. So, as Michelle said, we really wanted to ask those questions, particularly the last one about the questions that you have, because that's really largely how we got started with a lot of questions. So, Michelle and I really came to this research area through our involvement in the Coalition of Online Learning Excellence. We are co-chairs of the Student Success Committee for COLE. Which is one of the newest committees in that organization. We started, I think, about 2 years ago, and the charge really was to explore online student success in the state of Oklahoma and what we can do to ensure that we are adequately and fairly serving those students. And with that charge, we've explored a lot of different topics from broadband accessibility and digital literacy to how institutions survey satisfaction of online students. But in really the last year or so, a lot of our conversations have really focused on concurrent students specifically. They had come up often in other conversations, and we had one meeting in particular that really sort of sparked a lot of interesting questions that we realized we really didn't know the answers to, even at our own institution, but certainly not statewide. I should say, probably some people knew the answers for their institutions, but many of us realized we didn't even really know those answers for our own institutions, much less statewide trends. And so, like we said, we really just started with a lot of questions about concurrent enrollment rates and across the state, including things like recruitment and how students are made aware of this opportunity, as well as partnerships and collaboration among secondary and post-secondary institutions to make these programs feasible. We also had questions about the accessibility of these opportunities and success rates of concurrent students. So how were they performing in their concurrent classes? How were their college GPAs, not just in those concurrent classes, but beyond? What kinds of student support is being provided and what is needed? And we also wanted to look at other factors that contribute to success of concurrent students, like socioeconomic status, geographic location, first generation status, etc. And a lot of our questions also revolved around retention. How well are concurrent students persisting beyond their concurrent coursework? And how many of them stay in Oklahoma for that coursework versus going out of state? So we had all of these questions that we just didn't know the answers to. So we began then trying to find those answers and to really try to get some understanding of Oklahoma's concurrent student population. But we found that there are some challenges. Some of the challenge, and really we would say that most of the challenges that we encountered in trying to gain that better understanding really fell in these three areas: finding existing published data, requesting data that for things we couldn't find published, and then ultimately reading that data and figuring out what it meant and how to use it. So in terms of starting point, the best starting point is, of course, looking for what's already out there. So we started by trying to find what kind of published data existed. But what we found is there really wasn't very much. And there were a lot of challenges because there's not a lot of consistency. For instance, there's not a standard definition of what concurrent students are by state. And there's no federal definition of what a concurrent student is. There's also a lack of reporting requirements for concurrent students in a lot of federal, or really in most federal reporting, like iPads. Don't report concurrent student data. And there's also been a lot of changes in terminology and just differences in terminology, whether you call them concurrent students or it's dual enrollment, or if they are categorized as high school students. So a lot of challenges just in finding the data. So since there wasn't very much already published, we then began trying to request other data, largely through OSHRI in the regions, but there were some other data sources utilized as well, which Michelle will talk a little bit more about in a few moments. But in order to request data, there are a lot of things you have to know, like who maintains and collects that data. And as kind of evidenced in our polling, you have to know who to ask, but you also have to know what to ask, right? That includes the terminology, but also just what kinds of questions, what kinds of information will actually really be helpful. And you also have to know what format to request your data in so that it will be legible and useful. On our committee, we were very, very fortunate to have somebody who works in institutional research, Michelle, who knew the answer to those questions. She knew what information is reported and where. She knew what terminology to use. So that was an advantage for us to be able to kind of progress in collecting this information. But then there are additional challenges in then reading that data, even having that expertise in Michelle, even though she had that knowledge of not just how to request the data, but how to understand and use data, the format that it's returned in is not always palatable for general populations. So it's typically going to need to be analyzed before it can really be usable. And not everyone has that ability. And not everybody has the same level of data literacy. And an advanced degree does not guarantee equitable understanding of data analysis and visualization. I am a perfect example of that. I have a master's degree, but my master's degree is in English. So every bit of research I have ever done has been qualitative. I have virtually no experience with data analysis, requesting data, and certainly not how to analyze it from its raw form. So these are challenges that anybody trying to answer these questions, to do this kind of research would encounter. And again, we were just very fortunate on our committee to have somebody with that expertise to really take the lead and guide us. And I'll just say many times throughout this presentation where I and Michelle will say we, what we really mean is her. She did this. You can see her shaking her head. She didn't want me to say that, so I had to make sure and get it out before she started talking again. But so we're going to kind of talk through some of these in a little bit more detail, and Michelle's going to share a little bit more about how we utilized existing data and then requested and tried and analyzed the data beyond that.
Well, thank you, Jeni. She's always very overly generous. It's what I do for a living, so it's not that big of a deal. But I enjoy it. But one thing I wanted to talk about real quick is statistics in context. So one of the things that's so important about and was important for us to explore those existing published data sources is because Oklahoma data or just statistics in general without context are useless. So, and there's two kinds of context to consider. We've got situational and then data. So a really easy example of this would be seeing a steep decline in enrollment trends on a line chart, which on its own means absolutely nothing. However, if you couple that with census data showing a sharp decline in birth rates and employment data showing high unemployment rates in a region, the data has more meaning and significance. And these are examples of data and situational context. And we're going to focus, I'm focusing primarily on data context because the lack of it can cause a lot of misinformation or purposeful creation of disinformation. But there's numerous free data resources out there beyond your own institution's information. And this page basically just features those. These sources, wanted to make those easy. They're all hyperlinked. They're great for adding context to your own data and allow you to look at specifically the concurrent student concurrent student data in a much more holistic manner. And so, like I said, these are all linked. These are just kind of give you a great place to start in addition to your own institution's, specific requesting that specific data. And we, of course, will have the dashboards for Oklahoma wide. We'll go over those in a bit. But I just wanted to bring up how important it was to always contextualize that data as much as possible.
Which is a very important reminder when you're beginning any research project, but particularly having to pull data from a lot of different places and things. So, and a couple of other reminder or sort of tips, I suppose I would say, that we wanted to sort of share based on our experiences. As we kind of mentioned before, the terminology and definitions vary a lot depending on the source. So if you're getting data from OSHRI or school regents, versus your institution or federal reports, there can be a lot of variation as we were kind of discussing. And an easy example of that is retention versus persistence. At OSUIT, to use Michelle's institution as an example, persistence is fall to spring terms. But at OSU Stillwater, it is term to term. So even within, schools really under the same umbrella, there can be that variation that you have to be aware of in requesting and using data. Another example is, as we mentioned, the different terminology for concurrent students specifically, whether it's concurrent, dual enrollment, high school, first-time freshmen. That terminology can vary by the source and the report. And particularly as you are, trying to navigate research or data, and what terms to use, the best experts really are at your own institution. People in the institutional research office or office of accountability, as Michelle, as our resident expert illustrates. Also, your institution's UDS coordinator, who will be familiar with not only how your institution records the data, but also how external units like OSHRI and the National Student Clearinghouse will want that data reported. So what terminology is used in those reports, for instance. And your registrar's office can also be a good resource for this. But particularly for people like me who do not have that expertise on our own, we are going to have to utilize experts who we have at our disposal like this.
Okay. So most of the data that we use to build these dashboards, as Jeni mentioned, was provided by OSHRI, which you may know, it comes from public colleges and some private universities, but not high schools. This data is not from the high schools. And I feel it's very important to stress that because they are fundamentally two different data sets. And so what the schools, universities record, the higher education records is different than what the high schools have. And as we keep going, we'll talk about how that can cause discrepancies and how it has a tendency to sort of skew our perception of concurrent data and concurrent outcomes and concurrent demographics. So we're going to demonstrate some of the analysis that we've done with a few of the dashboards. In total, we created 9 dashboards for this project. The data in these dashboards goes back 5 years. Some of it actually, that's the minimum. Some of it actually goes back 6 years. And then at the end of this presentation today, all of the links to the unique dashboards will be shared. So a big part of this initiative, again, was to build a better understanding of demographics for our concurrent students. So the first dashboard that we're going to see today is the Oklahoma concurrent high school student demographics. Also, when the presentation is shared, all of the images of those dashboards are hyperlinked, so you can just jump right to them. And so,
Did my
so
screen
the one you
change?
can see here, yeah, go ahead.
I was
Yes.
just asking if it changed. Okay.
Yeah, got it. And so this dashboard, if you scroll up just a hair, there we go. You can see that it includes an analysis of gender, race and ethnicity, Oklahoma residency, and non-resident alien status. And this is only of concurrent high school students. It's very rare to find any published reports, even within most individual institutions, that specifically itemizes concurrent student data. So that's why we really wanted to take a closer look at it like that. And one thing I will mention is the non-resident alien status, which if you click on that, it has a definition of what that is. This status is actually about to go away. So I believe in the next year or so, we are no longer going to have access to that particular data set, and it's going to be lumped into others. And so again, this is population information that changes over time. terminology changes, recording changes over time, and we'll kind of talk about how that impacts this information. But these are all interactive, so you can see that they have filters. Almost all of them have academic year and academic term filters, and so you can pick through those and get us just drill down to learn more about the demographics of this is again overall Oklahoma high school concurrent students. The second dashboard we're going to take a look at has a breakdown of Oklahoma concurrent high school tribal affiliation. So if you are, for example, a Native American serving non-tribal or tribal institution, this data may be of particular interest to you. You'll notice also that it's broken down by tier, okay? And the tier is the institution the high school student is attending for their concurrent courses. And the definitions of those tiers are there at the top. You can also filter by those. And you can also search for a specific tribe to see counts and percentages. And if you hover over any of these data points, you get more information. Or sometimes when there's too many, you can see the individuals there. Then the third dashboard we wanted to feature, it shows Oklahoma concurrent enrollment by town and high school.
Oh, sorry, I've lost my presentation.
Oh, it was just there 2 seconds ago.
I know, but
Yeah.
now, oh,
That's it.
I'm not, it won't let me click
Oh,
because I'm not in the presentation mode. But I got it. It kicked me out of the presentation.
Okay, so this one shows it has several tabs. The first one here is a density map that shows what towns and high schools the concurrent students come from. So again, if you're curious about where those populations are coming from, if you hover over those circles, there's quite a bit more information. There's a breakdown of what tier, how many high schools are in that area. And then, of course, in reporting, there's always some NAs. So you can see there's that pop out box there. We even have some that fall under out of state. And then we have the private schools, some of the private high schools, and those are featured there as well. And again, this is also something you can filter. Then at the top, there's a couple more tabs. This one allows you to search. You could search by high school. You could search by town. You can look at changes by semester, like high school name as well. So if you're interested in taking a look at those, like the high schools that your college predominantly works with, you can see, are all those kids going to your school? Because your school may fall in a certain tier, or are they going to another one, which is in the same region that they're allowed to choose from? So that's more interesting information there. But this is sort of makes a dent in the information we started building on student or concurrent student demographics. I will say, so we've got zip codes on there. Just a quick caution. Zip codes, this is a incomplete data set. It is a heavily incomplete data set. When institutions submit their mandatory state reporting, which is where all this data comes from, unfortunately, not all schools fix all their errors. And a frequent error is zip codes. And so this really just gives you kind of an idea. So don't hold too fast to this one. But it's fascinating because when you zoom further out, you really can see those zip codes from out of state and things like that. So sort of those anomalies that you're like, why is that happening? Mm-hmm. The whole point is to give you information to ask more questions. This may or may not answer your questions. It really just helps you ask more.
And better questions, right?
Yeah, more informed questions.
All right. Sorry, trying to go back to the presentation. All right. So kind of to that point, as Michelle said, a lot of what we're doing is trying to provide some sort of input and insight from our experience to help others as they, as you may try to conduct your own research about concurrent students at your institution and how that compares elsewhere across the state. And so, some of the things that we really have found that needed to be considered and that we would strongly encourage that you keep in mind, considerations to keep in mind in requesting, analyzing, and reading concurrent data are really these. And we're going to talk through them in a little bit more detail as we go through here in a moment, but really understanding the populations, considering the impact of time and how that really does make a difference in analyzing the data, as well as identifying stakeholders for whom this information is important, and could lead to important conversations, but also, perhaps better service and outcomes for our students, which is really the goal, right? So as I said, we're going to kind of talk through those pieces in a little bit more detail to provide a little bit more insight and hopefully help as you undertake similar initiatives.
Right. And so within the understanding populations, there's three main things that I'd like you to keep in mind, which is variables and the incomplete data sets, which I've already mentioned one, and then cohorts. So you're welcome to click on any of those dashboards or open any of them. These are two different ones. These dashboards that are on this page and linked are specific to outcomes with comparisons to, so concurrent high school students with comparisons to all college freshmen. So that, the concurrence may be grouped in with that. But so the first thing is variables. So the misrepresentation of data is one of the most important things we would want to avoid. And this is something that's really easily done, especially when we're reviewing really large amounts of data over time, or when looking at data points that are impacted by differing variables. Some variables may seem like they're the same by title, but are in fact completely different populations, which may or may not be good for comparisons. I do want to point out on this page, there are two groups. See, this one, it said there's Oklahoma High School highest composite high school ACT or ACT scores by count of testers. And you'll see those numbers are from ACT Incorporated. And then the other one is Oklahoma High School concurrent composite ACT scores by count of students. So they are two fundamentally different populations. For example, the Oklahoma High School concurrent one, not but from ACT, they don't report, or the ACT one, I should say, doesn't report things under a certain count. Like that's why there's so few on the lower end of the spectrum, and there's more on the score side of the regular high school reports. So it's just really important to keep those sort of differences in mind, because, and while that doesn't negate the value of these two visualizations of the data, they are two different populations, and it is just really important to note that. So they're just best for giving you an idea. And rather than they're not, directly, you can't compare them directly. They're not exact duplicates of each other, if you understand what I mean. So another one would be incomplete data sets. For example, so not all students share the same enrollment outcome, demographic data, and that can really limit our ability to draw strong and weak correlations. We know in higher ed, pretty much nothing's a causation, it's all correlation. But an example of this I could still give those ACT scores as an example. As we know, that test isn't required by all institutions for entrance, and the number of students who are taking it is in decline anyway. So using only the ACT scores or only high school GPA does not allow for strong prediction of student college or career success. And then the last one is cohort, which I'll talk about that in the next slide, if you want to switch back to that. Because cohort has to do with understanding the impact of time. And it's best described as the difference between trends and cohorts, or the tracking of student data over time versus a snapshot. They're two completely different things. And again, a simple example of this would be tracking persistence and retention versus simple counts over time. Here's a really long-winded definition, but it's a good one. A cohort is a group of students who enter a college or program at the same time. One commonly followed cohort consists of first-time college students who enter at a particular point in time with no previous college credits, or concurrent students. They're both great examples. So tracking these so-called first-time and college students allows colleges to better understand the characteristics of those entering students, regardless of full-time or part-time, and their development in education, their enrollment in academic or vocational tracks, as well as other demographic information. And then in later enrollment periods, cohort tracking allows colleges to examine the progress of students who begin at the same so-called starting line. So for example, a college may want to know how many credits students attempted and completed, what grades they receive, and whether or not they succeeded in those important gatekeeper courses such as first college level math and English courses. This definition comes from that linked article there. So basically, students entering a program at the same time are not represented by most trend line analysis. So you can see a trend line there on the top right. Cohort tracking is something completely different. It's much more complex and requires the tracking of individuals over time. So for example, all of the dashboards are only snapshots. The terms on the axis, for example, on this college cumulative GPA average comparisons, they show you all the students at that time. It does not show you the changes over time in college GPA of concurrent students entering as of the fall 2018 year. So each term is a completely different set of students, a new population with new characteristics and new variables. And so it's really interesting to compare these two groups, but just keep in mind this, in all of these pages, anything with a timeline on it, it's not tracking a specific set of students. And there's a reason for that. It's very difficult to request that kind of data while also protecting student privacy, because cohort data requires us to track it at the individual level. And I would like to have done that, but I mean, the state regions are obviously reticent to give me student social security numbers, for example. And so that's something to keep in mind limitation wise when you're doing something on a broader scale, but at your own institution, that is something that you can request, but due to the complexity of the request, I want you to keep that in mind. They are two very different questions. You can learn a lot from both, but they are very different. So I hope I didn't harp too much on that, but it's
No,
really,
I think
really
that
important.
it is really important information. And sort of like when Michelle first was talking to me about it, I was like, mind blown, Michelle. So, oh goodness, now it's working. Okay, so we now want to kind of go back to a sort of interactive piece. You know, as Michelle said, the goal of developing these data dashboards was really to build a deeper understanding of Oklahoma's concurrent programs, policies, and students. So we have a few additional questions that we'd like you to answer. And again, you can use the Menti link in the chat or scan the QR code if you still have it available. I'm going to stop sharing that screen and start sharing this screen. Okay, so our first question, we want to sort of start at looking at sort of the macro level. What departments at your institution do you think would benefit from having access to more analysis of, am I on the right question? Oh, I guess I am. Okay, sorry. I was afraid I was on the wrong question. So what departments would benefit from having access to more analysis of your concurrent student population? Is it your department, other departments on your campus that you can really see where that information would be valuable to them? Who do you think are some of the stakeholders at your
I guess
institution?
this would be the micro level,
Yeah, I'm
actually.
sorry. I was like, that's why I was confusing myself.
Yeah, yeah. So this is the smaller version. We've been looking at the bigger version, which we'll ask about that too. But yeah, who at your institution and what specific departments? So this is on the micro level. Only your concurrent population.
Management.
Yeah. Ooh, that's
Yes, absolutely. That's an excellent point. Grants and leadership, recruitment. Yeah, I think that, and advising, very involved with online learning. Because
there's another dashboard which we don't which is available, but there's another one that shows how concurrent students are enrolled, like what format of courses they're leaning towards. With the growth of online learning, you can look at that trend of those counts over time and see what different formats, hybrid, in person, so on and so forth, that concurrent students are choosing to take. So that's another dashboard we have.
And
It's
that was one of our very starting questions
Yeah.
was, how many of these students are taking online classes versus others? We've got some other good admissions, excellent answer, institutional effectiveness, academic affairs. I mean, I think in some ways, when I thought about this question myself personally, I thought almost everybody at the institution has some interest in this, right? Even, student affairs, student wellness and health services, student life. Do we try to get those students engaged in our campuses as concurrent students, which might also impact their decision of where to go after they graduate high school. So I think those are great answers, and a lot of the same ones that I think came up in some of our conversations as well. I think we have, now we'll look at sort of the macro level. In terms of the statewide information that we've been sharing today, which can be broken down by institutions in many cases, but in terms of the overall trends across our state, who at your institution do you think would find that kind of data most useful? Who might you share these dashboards with?
I consider these dashboards to be another type of contextualizing tool. So you at the micro level would want to learn, of course, more about your own institution's population. And then these dashboards can be a contextualizing element as well, just like all of those sources that we linked on that previous page. So we're just curious who you think might find this useful, possibly for contextualizing your own institution's data.
In some ways, I think for me, this one's a little bit harder to think about who's doing the work of trying to contextualize that data at my institution.
Well, for us, we're one of the things we're working on, which has us tied up with the PDP, is the College America initiative. where we're trying to improve our first year experience. And anything to do with first year experience includes concurrent students, although they fundamentally have a very different first year experience. So, understanding what that looks like on a statewide level, I think plays a role. I mean, one of the purposes of the PDP, post-secondary data partnership with the National Student Clearinghouse, which the state regents are pushing, is so that we can get more of a statewide look at our student populations and better understand and analyze them. And so it's another effort to sort of standardize the data collection and publication of this kind of data. And the PDP asks about like first generation status. So we'll talk about that a bit.
Yeah, that came up a lot in our conversations. And some good answers to the question of recruitment. Marketing is a really interesting idea in terms of how we are marketing those opportunities. Academic affairs, student services, again, recruitment, great answers. Yeah. So, and I think, I know we're kind of probably getting close on time, so I won't sort of belabor this any longer. I'm going to go ahead and try to switch screens while I'm talking if I can manage that. But I think that those, being able to think about how we can use this data was one of our primary objectives. And so hopefully that starts getting some ideas and creative juices, I guess, flowing there. Okay, so moving on now to really kind of our last content slide, I'd say. We wanted to end by sharing some of our observations from the research and sort of analyzing the information that we found and that Michelle has so skillfully put together for us. After kind of going through all of that process, a lot of our observations really relate to accountability. In general, there really seems to be a lack of accountability for existing concurrent programs due to missing data points that are pretty important for some of the objectives that I think at least many of us as institutions, as well as I think statewide in our concurrent initiatives, goals that we have set, and yet we don't have good data to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of those initiatives or to identify ways that we can improve and better serve our students. So as Michelle mentioned earlier, missing information on first generation students. How many concurrent students are first generation? That, of course, relates to access and student support. So that does lead ultimately to what seems to be a lack of accountability and a lack of ability to accurately assess and improve those programs. As Michelle was talking about earlier, it's not currently possible to track cohorts yet without working more closely with OSHRI to obtain data, but that's complicated by student privacy because, again, the only way to do that is by the individual student. And so for a statewide initiative, it would be very difficult for any individual institution or person to do that because cannot legally have access to that information. However, at the institutional level, that is much more doable because we do have access to that information. But we're also missing contextualizing cohort data, like missing data points like whether the students are junior or senior level, which is not reported and of course has implications for credit hour eligibility and things like that. It's a pretty important piece of data for cohort tracking. There's also a lack of consistency in data tracking from high school to college, which also makes it difficult to answer a lot of these questions or find good data to analyze a lot of these questions. But one of our biggest takeaways was about decision making. So how are decisions being made in the legislature regarding concurrent student funding if this data isn't readily available? And sort of looking inward, how are we as institutions making decisions about concurrent student initiatives and services without easy access to this kind of information, which some institutions may have at the institutional level, but we think, and we sort of found that a lot do not. And while this sort of seems to emphasize a lot of challenges, there's also a lot of opportunity in this, right? There's a lot of opportunity to look at how well we are accomplishing the goals of concurrent programming, but also a lot of opportunities for more collaboration. For instance, collaboration among secondary and post-secondary institutions, perhaps in recruitment and making sure students are aware of this opportunity and to help them be able to take advantage of it. Accessibility, also things like ACT and college readiness workshops or help through the admission process. There also could be opportunities for instructors and professors at the secondary and post-secondary level to collaborate, as some institutions already do, in terms of offering courses at the high schools or at locations that are more convenient for them. There could also be partnerships where high school teachers and college professors work together to provide support to one another on content as well as things like classroom management, where we can really benefit one another through collaboration. So, and I think those are just some examples. I think there are lots of other opportunities like that that have come up in our conversations around this. So that is, in a nutshell, I would say, some of our major takeaways and observations going through this process. Michelle, is there anything that you would add to that or that I didn't really explain?
No, I think you covered a lot of it. There are a lot of opportunities for collaboration when it comes to data. There's like 5 sets of data that Regents and the high schools through the STAR initiative, STAR program, collaborate on and consistently report on. But there's a lot more that we could do, and not all of that data is publicly accessible. So that's a big part of it. Just lack of standardization at the state, federal levels, and by federal levels, I mean Department of Ed, IPEDS, and by state, I mean not just within Oklahoma, but I mean state to state.
Mm-hmm.
Current policies vary across every single state, so it's very difficult. Oklahoma is looking at other states right now. Even though we were an early adopter of the concurrent program, we're looking to see how we can improve it by working with or looking at how other states are doing things, so we don't continually try to reinvent the wheel. So there's just a lot of lack of standardization, but that also lack of standardization is also opportunity. So it's a positive and a negative. But I think you covered it really well. Thanks.
No, thank you. Well, and Melissa, go ahead.
Well, I want to say outstanding job. I might kick off the questions with a question of my own, actually. So you had mentioned data collection or, gathering insights, because I like qual and I like quant. It's all very helpful. What do you see as the biggest challenge why some people do not collect data? Because when I'm asking people, what's your data showing? How's your progress? What do you have? I'm always surprised by how many people say, well, we haven't reached out. We don't have feedback. We don't have that information. So what do you see, and it can be anecdotal as well, prevents people from data collection?
Well, at the state
Yeah,
level,
Michelle probably has she has a pretty unique perspective, being the one who is, responsible for data reporting, and people report data to her, request data from her. So I think that she has probably a lot more to add to that question than I do. But I do think that some of it, and maybe this is just shaded by me, so it's definitely anecdotal, but I think some of it sometimes is feeling intimidated at the idea of dealing with data and not really knowing where to start, right? If you're new taking over a program or in a director role and there's information you would like to have, but it's never been collected, even knowing how to go about beginning to collect that data. I think sometimes it's intimidation, a little bit, and just not really knowing where to start, which is part of what, we hope to sort of address, is like, how do you even get started with some of these questions? So, Michelle, though, from your perspective, I bet there's a lot you could add to that.
well, no, I think that is true, though. I think everything you said is completely valid. I was going to speak from more the state level. One of the things that we talked about was first generation, how that's a data point that's missing. Well, a lot of institutions actually do already collect that, but the definitions and things are not standard. They have, they're not being standardized from the federal level or the region level. And so working with the regions, it's a conversation that's come up more than once. There's the difficulty in asking for that data is the groundwork you have to do first, which is making sure everybody's asking the same exact question and they use the same definition, and that we decide how best to report it. So that can really slow the process down, but it's necessary. So that kind of thing for sure. But yeah, everything else I would agree with. It can be intimidating, and that's why one of the reasons why I feel like one of the best pages we have is the experts. Is there a data dictionary available for it? Yeah, sort of. It's called the UDS manual.
Can you drop that in the chat for everyone?
Yeah, it's the UDS manual. How do you spell manual? How do I spell manual? I don't know how to spell manual. Say it 5 times, and now I definitely don't know. It comes out every year with updates, and the reason I say that is because that is where they define all of the variables and terms that are in the required state reporting that all state institutions have to submit multiple times per year. So that is a good place to find those standardized definitions. And that's also why we know there is no first generation. And the question of first generation isn't, are you a first generation student? It usually asks about parental education. So and we're still working on finding a best way to do that, because again, if we come up with something and the federals want something different, then we don't want to do more work than necessary. We want to keep it all the same. But yeah, standardization, finding your populations, understanding who it is you really need to be asking the right question of as far as requesting data, not or like surveying, like your survey populations. And then when you get data back, really understanding those populations, it can be intimidating and confusing.
Absolutely. Which is, to kind of go back, utilizing the experts that you have at your disposal, right? Like, some of the initial work we did just was looking at comparisons of some not super official data among our institutions represented in our community, in our committee, but I didn't know any of that information. I had to go to our institutional research to find out, and sort of have them guide me through what I'm even trying to ask them for. So Yeah. Looks like we only have 1 minute left. Sorry, I did terrible leaving time for questions at the end. We appreciate you guys adding questions in the chat and participating in our polls and just being here today. We hope that this helps spark some engaging conversations for your institutions and across the state.
Are your slides available?
We intend to make them available. Exactly in what way that happens, I'm not sure. Like if it would be super handy if there's a way to add them where the Zoom link will be, like on the website, you know what I mean? Where it'd be like they could download it from there. We'll have to ask Crystala if we could add that link or something like that, because I don't really know how that works.
Or you've got
we
your
will.
contact information, someone could reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is our intention to share this because it has the links to all the dashboards as well. And we want people to be able to.
I tried to click on it, but we're on Zoom, so
Yeah, it won't work when you. I do that too. Why isn't that? Oh yeah, I'm viewing somebody else's screen. So, thank you so much, Melissa. Appreciate
You're
you.
welcome. It was a pleasure, and how wonderful. I do hope more of us get to see this. That's why I said when you can, you feel it's ready to share out, we would love to have it.
And
Yeah,
it's just the
absolutely.
link.
I mean,
So
welcome questions. I built those dashboards. It feels like an eternity ago. And so if anybody has any questions, they're welcome to reach out directly about them.
And she's very patient with dumb questions because I've asked several dumb questions. In fact, one that I've asked like 3 different times because I can't ever remember.
Those are the best ones. I usually made up
boy.
acronyms for my students because like, we can't remember this. Let's put it on something we can.
That's exactly it. But I'll email Crystala and ask her if we can add maybe the link to the presentation with the recording.